Okay, so this is the last new topic for the semester. So, as I'll cover in a second here, that the only other lecture period in a week from now will be the final exam review. So, looking forward, I posted on Canvas that so the AREs have been available. The UCEs, then I've now made it as a drop 9, so there's only 10. So that means that if you've done one and you did well enough, then the rest are basically practice exercises. So I will get those out this Thanksgiving break, but you should just treat them as ways to practice learning the learning outcomes because yeah, pretty much all of them, are except one, are dropped because it just took so long to get those out. It's just taken me a lot longer to put together each one of these units than I was expecting. So hopefully that's okay. The other thing is the group project. I've put the rubric online. So now there is a group project assignment. It's just a Canvas-based assignment where you'll upload a video. And that has at the very bottom a rubric, which I think is expanded by default. If not, there should be a view rubric you can click on. And it basically follows the outline that I gave on Thursday, where I don't go over time and give me an introduction, give me your causal question related to that introduction, a hypothesis, or two, answering that causal question, an experiment, hoping to test that hypothesis or hypotheses, predictions that come out of that experiment for those hypotheses or hypotheses, and then wrapping up with based on the potential outcomes of the experiments, what that might mean to your stakeholder, and all of that in 10 minutes. So not expecting a whole lot of detail, just a basic outline of here is a context that we found where there seems to be a potential interaction between humans and animal behavior, and that suggests this foundational causal question. And that causal question doesn't even have to reference the human part of it. Like it really could be that, the human part of it is that humans really like a particular color. And so they're, everything around this environment is red. And the causal question may have to do with how the animal responds to red. So in that case, the causal question is not about the human part. It's about the part that's relevant to the human part. And then it can be very foundational or fundamental after that. And then just bring it back to say, well, if we do find that these animals are very sensitive to red, then it might mean this. So stakeholders may need to consider whether to use a mixture of colors, or if we find that they're not sensitive to red, then everything should be fine. So that would be kind of like the conclusion or discussion there at the end should be relatively short. So the 10 minutes will go by very quickly. I'm confident it'll be enough time, but it should be one of those things where you want to strip out things like an agenda slide, an outline slide, that sort of stuff. You don't really need that. You don't really need to introduce every team member. You can just kind of jump right into what would a stakeholder care about. So why is the stakeholder there? It's like a proposal pitch. So that's outlined to this rubric. Try to be specific about your hypotheses. Make sure to include all those things, as I just said, tie it into the broader context, connect the predictions, the stuff the stakeholder cares about. And because this is a bio course, make sure to italicize your Latin binomials, and make sure the specific name of your Latin binomial is not capitalized. So that's not in the rubric. It's just something that if your stakeholder has a biology background, which the stakeholders in this class will, and then it jumps out at you because that we burned into your head that it's an italicized genus, or capitalized genus, italicized genus, and specific name, and specific name lowercase. So that's all the tips about the group project. So that means that next week after Thanksgiving, Tuesday, we'll have a final exam review. Come with your questions. If you don't have questions, I'll have a slide deck, which is kind of the greatest hits of all of the slides that I'll start from after the midterm. And then if we get through all of those, then I'll have effectively the midterm stack. So the stack preparing for midterm, so the pre-midterm ones after that. But I doubt we'll get that far. But that's just there to sort of motivate you to say, oh, I do have a question about that topic. Oh, I forgot about that topic. I have some questions about that. But if you just have questions, then we can just take questions, work questions, and those sorts of things. So that'll be Tuesday. Then Wednesday, that's when that oral presentation is due, because Canvas I need to have it assign the peer reviews. It really is due that Wednesday night. So that way they're all in Wednesday night so that immediately when I see the last one go in at midnight, I can say, Canvas, assign peer reviews so that everyone gets their peer reviews. So that will mean that every individual student, not group, will then be responsible for watching one of these 10-minute videos and filling out the rubric that's up here. And when filling out the rubric, writing comments on that. So those will be anonymous. So you'll, of course, be able to see who's presenting. They're not going to be able to see where that review is coming from, but I will see that review. So then I will not only look at the presentations, but also the reviews. And I'll just do a quick checkbox. Is this constructive commentary? If you filled out the rubric and did constructive comments, and you'll get your point for your review, and that goes to you, not your group. And then we'll look at all the group presentations and factor in not only the rubric, but also sort of what the response is from the stakeholders. In other words, the peer reviews from the rest of the students. And so those two things will sort of factor in to the grade for the final presentation here. So that'll be due Wednesday, and the peer reviews then due Saturday, just before finals week. So a couple days later. So only a couple days to watch that 10-minute video and fill out that rubric. Then on Thursday, so a week from the day that's off this week, so about a week and a half from now, a week and a couple days from now, that's when we'll have stage one. So you can come here to do that. I will open that up starting Wednesday. I'm considering opening it through Sunday, but definitely Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And whenever you start that stage one, you'll get 90 minutes. So if you come here, there usually is nobody trying to get in this room right after we close. So if you come here, I could also give you that 90 minutes, but you can do it anywhere at any time. But just know that when you start it, you get 90 minutes, just like the midterm. It's the same length as a midterm, even though it's the final exam. Then during finals week, all week, Monday through Friday, you'll have access to the collaborative portion. You will be able to come here. I think it's Thursday afternoon is the period that we have during finals week. So if you want to use that period, you can come here. If nobody's here in like the first 15 minutes, we might leave the room. But if you would like that space, but you don't have to come here. You could do it anytime that week. You don't have to collaborate. If you want to collaborate, you can. You can use Discord, you can use Slack, but you just have to only collaborate with people currently enrolled in this course, exactly like the midterm. I think that's all the admin stuff. So any questions? Yep. Uh-huh. Okay, so the top line of the rubric is like introduction, motivation, and that's just what. So ultimately, the causal question is going to be a general biological behavior, animal behavior question, which may not have any obvious connection to to anthropogenic changes in behavior. So the motivation is why you're trying to. Your stakeholder is someone who is interested in policy changes that might be related to anthropogenic changes in behavior. And the motivation is just making that connection. So as an example, I might say that we've noticed that a bunch of sulfur-crusted cockatoos have been aggregating around landfills in Australia. And so that suggests a change in their forage. And so we'd like to know more about that. That would be kind of the motivation. We've observed this pattern, and it seems to be related to human activity. So I'm now going to ask the question of, why are sulfur-crusted cockatoos attracted to dumps? Or I might say, something more specific that may not even involve landfills, but involves things that we know are in landfills. So it's just trying to because I'm trying to merge kind of con bio and animal behavior here. The con bio portion is sort of in the motivation, and then the animal behavior is in the causal question. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Yeah, I see that. It wouldn't be under peer review. If you actually go to the presentation assignment, so the one that you would upload, and then sorry, if you scroll or presentation video, proposal pitch, and on mine, it shows up right at the very bottom here. I don't know if the tab, and it's obvious that some of you have seen it. So on the tablet view, I might just need a chance to look at it more, but there should be a way to view that rubric. And if you can see on the desktop view, there's a little view rubric at the very bottom, and I'm sure there's a way to see it on the tablet, but I don't ever use the student view on the tablet, so I don't know off the top of my head. But if you have trouble, I can like take a screenshot of it, post it other ways. Before yeah. So the study guide, like the midterm, is just the aggregate of all the study guides for the units. So I think in the final exam section, I already linked all the study guides, but so that's gonna if I haven't released that page, or if I haven't published that page, that's all it will end up being. So that's what I would say for the final exam. I would just recommend going through the units, focusing on the ones that came after the midterm, and then looking at their study guides and each one of their learning outcomes. Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah, there's nothing in the rubric about like equal parts, people or anything. You don't even have to see everybody. It's just whatever kind of makes sense to make kind of a compelling case. So if you could record like using Zoom, you could have one person just start the recorder on PowerPoint and just have it do a voiceover on slides. Whatever sort of works for you to make that a compelling case to your stakeholder. Other questions? Yeah. Maybe send me a note and then I can try to debug this out for you. But oh, so it wouldn't be here. That's the peer review assignment. So you want to go to the actual group project. That's the peer review. So if you search for presentation, yeah, you should be able. Any other questions? Yeah. No, I mean, because there's not really an opportunity. I mean, so if they help make your case, you could say like why should a city manager care about ground squirrels or something like that? If there's some citation that helps you make that case, or if you make claims, that would be the thing, is that I'm not asking you to do like a formal review. But if you do make a claim that needs justification and it's not obvious from data that you've included in your presentation, then you could say, a study, or at least cite, that, provide that citation. But I'm not looking for a bibliography page or anything like that. So remember that the key pedagogical point of this exercise is to give you practice at formulating a causal question, hypothesis, an experimental design, and a prediction. And then hopefully within the background of a topic that we haven't had a chance to speak a lot about in this class, but is something that is of interest to people, is the intersection of animal behavior and con bio. So that is the goal here. That's the spirit of the assignment. It's not to sort of have you like write a report based on all of the reading assignments or anything like that. So don't feel like I'm hoping this should be a relatively low stress where you're not going to need a lot of justification, not a lot of additional reading. Just let's come up with a question, come up with an experiment, and so on. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So closing out this semester here, we've talked a little bit about social behavior, but we haven't focused specifically on it. And there's a lot of very interesting social behaviors. A lot of people are very much attracted to social behaviors. I think in part because humans are so social. There are very conspicuous social behaviors like these starling murmurations. So these are flocks of starlings that I'm sure you've seen behaviors like this normally associated with starlings, but certainly you can have murmurations in other animals. You can have murmurations of even locusts on the ground as they're marching, murmurations of different birds, fish, and so on. Every once in a while you'll see a bird of prey flying around here too, which will become relevant here in a second. So there's these interactions here. So very cool patterns, and they do suggest a lot of questions about these patterns. I mean, I think the obvious questions, the immediately obvious questions are the how questions, the mechanistic questions. And you find that physicists and biophysicists are sort of, they're attracted to these things. They're sort of saying like, well, how does an individual behavior, if you add up a bunch of them, lead to this type of collective behavior where it looks like a blob when there really is no membrane around that blob. But then there's also the why questions, the ultimate questions of, well, why would individual behaviors be selected for to do this? Like where is the benefit going? Who is benefiting? Who's paying the cost? And so it sort of suggests like, is this cooperation or is this just some sort of emergent coordination? So, what do we even mean by cooperation? And in some ways, this is a question of how interesting this behavior is. Does it just kind of, if this is somehow the outcome of individuals going it alone, but going it alone together, that somehow is very different than individuals working together. And that's, at the heart of that is the why here, the why questions. But you could definitely ask both how and why. Beautiful behaviors for sure. There are related behaviors. So these are some sheep. They were spread apart here, and this is slow motion. Then I think they've got a dog coming in here. And as the dog comes in, the sheep, to start to pack together into this sort of group here. This group outfitted these sheep with loggers so they could grab their positions. So when they have a bunch of these tracks like this one here, where you have the sheep that are out here, and as the threat becomes closer to them, eventually it'll hit a point where you start noticing this collective behavior where they all gather together and move around as a group. And in a way, it looks very similar to kind of these starling murmurations. And it starts suggesting potential explanations for why these aggregate behaviors might be around. Another example of that, this was a cool study that was done in Australia, where they had these seal dummies. So this is just a kind of a wooden cutout that looks like a seal when you're looking up at it from underneath, from below the water, and they fastened a bunch of these seal dummies to these kind of floating raft structures that look like this. So you've got these seal dummies like this one that's in this particular position. And then they let these things float in shark infested waters and just decided to see what happens. Any guesses about what's going to happen? So you float a bunch of dummy seals in shark infested waters? Yeah. Yeah. So I like the way you phrased that. I'm not sure which one, but eventually a shark is going to attack one of these dummy seals. And it turns out sharks did attack these dummy seals, and they were specifically built this experiment to try to answer that question of which one, and trying to understand which one of these was more in danger than others. And this was so effective. They float this thing out and they had so many shark attacks that they got so much data so quickly. I think they had to actually truncate their experiment early because people were freaking out seeing all these shark attacks that were just, close to the horizon as they were doing this. So what was the point here and what did they find? So, they built these dummies to maintain distances between these seals that test an idea that we're going to talk about in detail here in a second. But basically, you have a real seal group. If you actually watch seals that from above with like a drone, you can watch seals as they're swimming around together, and each seal is at one of these dots. And then you can draw an area around each one of these dots, which are the set of points around the seal that are closest to that seal and not any other seal. So you have this area here, this area, all of these points are closest to this dot. All of these points are closest to this dot. All of these points are closest to this dot. All of these points are closest to this dot. So what they did is they then they built artificial seal models with their rafts where they tried to reproduce these similar aggregations, both in the shape of them and then also the size of these, what I will call domains of danger, I guess, danger domains, domains of danger. And so here's what that looks like with 4 seals. This is an artificial 4 seal group. Here's what that looks like with 5 seals. So now some guesses. What do we think might happen if you've got a bunch of these things floating over top of shark-infested waters where the dummy seals have different amounts of space around them? Any thoughts as to what might happen in these shark attack outcomes? Yeah. So by closer to the edges, that would mean sort of a larger domain of danger. Yeah, so that's one prediction, right? I mean, I've kind of given away one aspect of the hypothesis, the domain of this. So this domain of danger hypothesis is exactly that, is that if you put yourself in an aggregation with other prey, if you have a larger domain of danger around you, this domain of danger hypothesis predicts that you'll be more likely to get attacked. And so that's exactly what they're trying to test in here. So they generated a bunch of these rafts with a bunch of different domain of dangers and then saw how often were different seals attacked. And so what they found is that here is all of the attacked individuals, and here are all of the nearest neighbors to the attacked individuals who weren't attacked. And if we average out the domain of danger for the attacked individuals, there is a statistically significant difference. So in other words, a larger value than the domain of dangers for the nearest neighbors. So this does sort of is consistent with that domain of danger hypothesis, where if you have a larger domain of danger, or if you're an attacked individual, it is likely that you happen to, before the attack, have a larger domain of danger. And they went further than that, in that they plotted all of the domain of dangers down here and all of the proportion of total attacks here. And this is a pretty beautiful and steep relationship here, that the farther you get away from the seal pack, then the more likely it is you're going to get picked off by a shark. So that's one of the cool results that they got out of this paper. Yeah. The more likely. So these ones here, they have a larger area around them between them and the others. And the way I like to envision this is if you're throwing darts at a dartboard, if you think about it, those shapes on the dartboard are like domains of danger and for the point totals inside each one of those. And so if you're just randomly throwing darts, the larger area you have, And if all of that area is associated with that seal, then basically what it's saying is that if a shark happens to come up in your domain of danger, you're the closest thing. So if you have a large domain of danger, then that means that there is a large area where a shark or a dart could come into your area and you're the only one that's home. And so they are more likely to go to you because you're closer than anyone else. That's the point of the domain of danger. So if you have a large domain of danger, you are sort of inviting a larger number of random darts being thrown at you that hits the area that you own. And that is what is showed, I think, pretty conclusively here, this domain of danger hypothesis here. So if this is what's really going on, what might you expect prey animals to do? What might you expect natural selection? What type of behavior would you maybe expect prey animals to take on in the presence of predators that have this relationship with their prey? Yeah, you group up. Why do you group up? Absolutely. So you don't want to be over here. You'd like to be over here. And that is the so-called selfish herd hypothesis. So this selfish herd is an idea that Bill Hamilton came up with in the 70s. He used a little theoretical model with a frog that was hopping on a line and was trying to figure out where the frogs wanted to be relative to other frogs, given that there might be like birds that were coming down and taking them out, and predicted this idea that they're probably going to want to minimize the domain of danger as much as possible relative to motion rules and whatever the other animals will permit them. And although it's an idea that has, I think, been very compelling, it hasn't actually been tested empirically in many, many cases. And so these are some examples here. Here, the selfish seal herd, but then here also those sheep examples that are trying to test that. And I think they show that it kind of matches these expectations. Once you introduce that predator, then you get these aggregations. Likewise, with those starling murmurations, very often those murmurations become so salient and cohesive when there is a predator nearby. And some people explain that, and it's difficult to tease apart these two hypotheses, that might be because if you can create a large envelope, then perhaps you can look like a large predator that can scare the bird of prey away. But this is also a very realistic. I mean, this is the thing that if you're very, very close to other starlings in that starling murmuration, you are less likely to get picked off by that bird of prey as it goes firing through there and then grabbing the nearest thing it can as they fly by. So that's the selfish herd hypothesis. So I can say it here. So it's individuals reduce their predation risk by aggregating to use other potential prey as a shield. So when you're putting other prey in between you and a predator, then that's what we mean by selfish herding. I'm clustering up to another prey item, not because I want to help them, but because it's actually helpful to me to put them in between me and the predator, the potential predator. And you could imagine as the predator moves and as the prey move, this leads to all sorts of interesting dynamics, like things like starling murmurations. And so you could ask, wow, why does the murmuration look like the particular thing? Is it trying to look like a sea or whatever? When in reality, that's probably an epiphenomenon. And when really what's happening there is if we plot out the domain of dangers of each one of those starlings, they would be remarkably similar across the starlings because they're all trying to reach the same domain of danger. And because it's a big, ugly mass, it causes it to writhe a little bit. But the one thing that is constant across time is that roughly their spacing is staying relatively regulated. So that's the idea of the selfish herd. When we say that animals are in selfish herds, we do use this word or this term domain of danger. I didn't make that up. And when you model that, then you also see, then people talk about it being a so-called Voronoi cell. So there is a mathematical problem of when you throw a bunch of dots on a surface and then you draw all of the domain of dangers, the mathematician's term for domain of danger is a Voronoi cell. And so you see those two terms tossed around to describe these things. And Hamilton, drew these Voronoi diagrams in his paper here. And anyways, that's a selfish herd. So it's interesting social behavior, but it's selfish. So to me, that kind of takes some of the wind out of it being a social behavior because it's really just using others for the benefit of yourself. All right. So any questions about that? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of the idea there is that there's always going to be individuals that it's been well for one birds they can't hover. Well, I mean some hummingbirds can, but most birds can't hover in place, so they have to move anyway. But then also there's some birds that are going to be worse off than other birds. There's a similar thing I don't talk about here, but emperor penguins, these giant penguins, there's this huddle behavior, and there's a very similar dynamic that goes on there. If you watch, popular media on it, they have all of these stories about them sharing heat and whatever, which don't make any sense biologically whatsoever. What does make sense is that if you're a cold bird, you move toward warmth. And so you end up coming in, but when you're finally warm, you stay in that warm place. Well, that will make it more likely that you're going to be displaced by these cold birds coming in. And so you get this churn, but you can reproduce this churn with a totally selfish model of birds that are on the outside being the cold ones tunneling in and displacing the ones that are just trying to stay in the middle that are, we're nice and warm, that then get then pushed onto the outside and then this repeats. So there's no, oh, they're not playing it, they're not being fair. It may end up being that everyone spends an equal amount of time in the middle, but that is an outcome of effectively a Nash equilibrium. That is not because there's some group selection process that is trying to benefit the species of emperor penguins or something like that. Because if it were, then there would always be an emperor penguin who could figure out how to just stay in the middle and never go out. And that one would end up being the one that has more offspring because it spends less energy and gets more warmth. So that's something we always have to consider here is when we see these beautiful collective behaviors, it's very tempting to think about selection acting on the group, but it is very difficult to actually find mechanisms that make biological sense where that happens. And this is one example. All right. So we've seen selfish behaviors similar to this in previous classes as well, not just the emperor penguin thing, but so in lecture G1, we talked about the raven scavenging leading to these extremely large wolf packs, way bigger than would benefit an individual wolf if there weren't these scavenging birds. And then at that same time, we also talked about these bats, and this was one of the subject of your readings, where these social foraging bats seem to be, yeah, question? Come together in a group, form groups with other of your same species. So so like in the bats case, there was this time to first prey detection, which was basically a fitness curve where it was it might be good to have groups of intermediate densities, but there's nothing that's keeping you from having groups of very, very large densities. Same with the wolves here. It might be there's a tragedy of the commons here where although it might be great if you could keep your wolf pack at 3, there's probably no way to keep your wolf pack less than 6. And then when they're scavenging birds, they can be much, much, much higher than that. So you get these groups and you see these groups and it's tempting to say, oh, these groups, they're working together. They're a team. But we don't need that type of narrative. because there is a more parsimonious narrative that it's actually just better for the individual to be in that group. And that's the type of behavior referred to as being selfish. Okay, so social groups are often structured, or it's most parsimonious. Occam's razor would suggest that we would prefer to think about these groups as being organized around exploitation and selfishness than something else. So social groups are often structured by exploitative networks and what we would refer to in economic literature as positive and negative externalities, where what I mean by that is positive externalities are benefits that are provided by others as a side effect. So if you're a bat and you're chirping out echolocation, some of that's going to bounce back and hit the ears of other bats, which may now be able to locate prey items. And so that's potentially, depending on how you model it, is viewed as kind of a public good. Or if you pay into public radio, other people are going to listen to public radio at no cost to you. So your donating to public radio is keeping the radio station online, and it doesn't bother you that other people are not paying in. It doesn't hurt, doesn't take away from your access. Although maybe it would be better if they paid in too, but that's it, the benefit they're getting is just a side effect of the activity you're doing. So that's what we refer to as positive externalities. Or there's the other half, negative externalities, where your choice to join the wolf pack is going to benefit you at a cost to someone else. And so in economics, that's the kind of language we use. And we also talk about positive externalities. We talk about public goods, negative externalities to things like open access goods, tragedy of the commons. In evolutionary biology, sometimes we use slightly different terms for the same ideas. So in the case of a positive externality, that's sometimes referred to, we have to be careful. Sometimes people just use the word mutualism. Mutualism also could refer to interspecies connections, where it benefits both groups. And that's certainly related here, but here I'm focusing on intra-species behaviors. And so this we sometimes refer to as byproduct mutualism. So the example I like to give is if I am searching for a parking space and parking spaces are arranged in rows, if someone else is coming down a row, if I can see that they're clearing the row, that they're also searching for a parking space, I probably shouldn't turn down that row. They've managed to signal to me that that row has no parking spaces. And likewise, if I drive down a row and they see me clear a row, they'll know not to go down that row. It doesn't hurt me directly to provide that information to them. It's a byproduct of me doing what I need to do anyway, which is search for a parking space, but it does help them. So that's it might look like we're cooperating. Might look like we're working as a team, but in reality, it's kind of parasitic. I don't want to say it's parasitic, it's mutualistic. It's just a side effect. The other side of that is selfishness, where we would say that it's a benefit to the actor, but at some cost to someone else out there. And that's like the selfish herd. You're aggregating together not because you're trying to provide a benefit to someone else. And it doesn't, I mean, in the selfish herd, it's a little bit interesting because you get closer to someone else, you actually reduce their domain of danger. But we still refer to it as selfishness. It's being driven not by helping behavior, it's thought to be selected because it's increasing the direct fitness of the individual doing the act. So there's those two, and then there's these two down here. But any questions about what I mean by those two? Is that pretty clear so far? These are kind of the easy ones. So what's interesting is these bottom boxes down here. So occasionally we'll see behaviors which are a cost to the actor that provides some benefit to a recipient. And at first, there's no way for us to account for um, why the actor might be doing this. And then there's another really interesting case where it is a cost to the actor and it inflicts a cost on a recipient. So an actor is going out of their way just to make another pay a cost. And that's sometimes referred to as spite or altruistic punishment. Yep. The No, so the selfishness is the opposite, where you're in selfishness, you're getting a benefit at the cost of someone else. In altruism, you're paying a cost to benefit someone else. So they're like the mirror image of each other. So this is helping behavior, that is hurting behavior. And then spite. So, and there are a ton of examples of spite in non-human animals where oftentimes the spite, which we're not going to focus too much on today, is actually a mechanism that helps explain the altruism. So in order to, if if there is a expectation of a particular behavior in a group, those that don't do the behavior might need to be punished, and but punishment costs an individual. And so, the being the individual that pays a huge cost, so much so that it hurts them just to inflict a potential punishment that ultimately leads to the cheating behavior never happening. That's what we refer to as altruistic punishment. So, as an example of that, there was a researcher here, I don't know, 20 years ago, who would have these unrelated leafcutter foundresses that would be in a lab here at ASU. And you'd have these unrelated queens that just mated separately from each other and are now were in this temporary association where they were dividing up the early tasks of building a new colony. And so that might mean feeding the new brood, that might mean going out and foraging, and so on. But it turned out that going out and foraging was extremely costly. You could dry out in the desert heat, you could get eaten, you could get squished. So it was much, much more costly than all the other tasks. But there would always be one newly mated queen who would be elected. No one knows exactly, even to this day, how that is determined, who's going to go out and forage. And so, but they would go out and forage, they would go out and they would bring their forage back in. In this case, they're leafcutter ants, so they were leaves. So they eat fungus that grows on the leaves. And so you need to bring leaves back for the fungus to grow. And if you don't bring the leaves back, the fungus will die. And if the fungus dies, all of the queens die. And so if you, when the queen is out foraging for leaves, if you pluck her away, very, very quickly, a new queen who was doing nursing or other nest tasks will flip into foraging, and she'll crawl out and she'll start chewing up leaves and bringing leaves back. But if you instead wait for the elected forager to go out her little tube, and you just pinch the tube so she can't escape, and wait for her to go back in, and then let it go, and whenever she tries to go out, you just prevent her from going out so she stays in. Then, even though leaves aren't accumulating, the other queens do not switch into foraging. They actually eventually they may switch, but it takes so long than most of the replicates that Rissing and Pollock did that the fungus died. So in that case, they are, because they can see the forager is there and the forager is not doing her costly job, then they withhold their own effort at their own cost. I mean, this is spite. It is at a major cost to them. They will die if no one goes out and gets those leaves. But they also know that the forager would die. And I say they know. What I mean by is natural selection knows. And so this kind of the fact that this behavior is latent in the ants is what is thought to be one of the reasons why that the forager always, once you elect a forager, the forager keeps foraging. Because if you don't forage, it is at a huge cost. So there is a mechanism that will kill the colony if you stop doing your costly job. So that's what we mean by spite or altruistic punishment, is at a huge cost to yourself, you inflict a punishment on someone else. So it's really a weird behavior, but it does show up in a number of interesting cases, and is not necessarily something you don't often think of a spiteful, slug or something like that. But those are examples that are out there. But so these are kind of the interesting cases, but we're going to mainly focus on this one over here. So before I move on to altruism, are there questions about any of that those four categories make sense? This is kind of the common way we cut um, this social behavior up in this grid, actor versus recipient, and then who's getting the benefit and who's getting the cost. Okay, all right. So altruism. So that's kind of our primary focus here. And so altruism, what do we mean by altruism? Well, I mentioned that the prisoner's dilemma is not a very useful game, but I will use it here. So the Prisoner's Dilemma is sort of probably the most famous, basic two-player game in game theory. So likely you've seen this in other courses. If not, the kind of quick review is imagine this setup where you've got two prisoners who were captured. They're being held in separate cells. They're being asked to rat out the other one. So they're being asked to give up information on the other one. And if they give up information first, then they will have a significant reduction in their sentence. And the other one that they give up information on will get a significant increase in their sentence. So the idea here is if they both just stay quiet, then maybe they both spend 2 years in jail. Yeah, that's right. If instead one of them defects, so one of them decides to rat out the other one, they maybe get released immediately. But the one they give information on, who does the helping behavior, who stays quiet, then they get 10 years in jail. Likewise, the flip of that, if it just flips so that this prisoner that was defecting now cooperates, but the other one defects, same thing happens. But then if they both rat out each other, then they end up just both hurting each other, but for whatever reason, they get sentences that are less than the sentences they would get if they're the sucker, maybe because their two stories don't match up quite as well, so they can't be put away for quite as this, it's not as much of a decisive judgment, so ends up being less than that. So the key point here is if we name these things, so this is reward for cooperation, punishment for defection, temptation to defect, and the sucker's penalty, and it has this relationship, temptation is greater than rewards, greater than punishment, is greater than the sucker's payoff, then we call that a prisoner's dilemma. So the payoffs here are in terms of years taken off your life by a prison sentence. That's why they're all negative. It's maybe a little more comfortable to make them positive, like we'll do here in the next slide. But any questions about this? It's just sort of review of prisoner's dilemma. All right, so as long as I maintain this relationship, then I can make these all positive. So this is also a prisoner's dilemma, but I've now just made them all positive. So imagine that if I cooperate with my partner, we both get 8. But if they cooperate and I defect, I'll get 10 and they'll get 1. Likewise, if it's flipped, and then if we both go alone, then we both only get 5. So in this particular case, this is almost identical to the stag hunt that we saw in the social foraging lecture, but we've basically flipped the role of T and R. So in the stag hunt, it was much better to cooperate. So imagine this is an 8 and these are 2 10s. Well, in that case, then we had a payoff dominant solution up here, and then we had a risk dominant solution down here. So we had 2 Nash equilibria, one that was better for us both if we just figure out how to get there, and the other one that was just safer for us both. The prisoner's dilemma makes it kind of even worse of a situation where it's good to cooperate, but it is really good to screw the other person over. And that often is contrived in a lot of biological examples, that you really get this much benefit out of defecting over cooperation. That's why usually like a stag hunt ends up being a more interesting problem. But what's, I guess, nice about this problem is this: it does model the idea of selfishness, the idea of if I have an option to cooperate, there's absolutely no world in which I'll do that cooperation. So the stag hunt, there is a world in which you would cooperate, but it's hard to figure out that the other one's going to cooperate. So it's just risky to cooperate. Here, it's just really better for you to defect. So there's only one national equilibrium, the defection equilibrium. And so, that's the prisoner's dilemma. And it becomes a model to sort of say, if there are apparent rewards like this, and yet you witness cooperation, there must be something you're missing. So the prisoner's dilemma is not that useful to describe real behavior. It's more useful as a foil to sort of reflect on what must on other things that could be going on. So as an example, if this is what I witness are the direct rewards for the actions, and yet I see a lot of cooperation, I might find out that, oh, actually, these two animals are clones of each other. So let's just think about that weird case where these two animals are identical to each other. Every gene in one animal is also in another animal. So if I've got a gene encoding for a behavior, that gene will also be in the other animal as well. So if I'm taking a gene first perspective on benefits, then now I actually have to think about benefits across both individuals. Because if one individual does something that hurts the ability of this gene to get into offspring, but it helps that gene get into offspring, from the gene's perspective, it doesn't care whether it's in that offspring or that offspring. So from this perspective, where if I have two clones, I can take this payoff matrix and turn it into this payoff matrix, where now all of the payoffs from one player are shared by the other player. And that's why in this weird clone world, it's still T greater than R greater than P greater than S, but all of the cells have the same payoffs to both. So it doesn't matter who's getting the reward. From the gene's perspective, the gene's getting the reward in both cases because they're clones. So from this perspective, if here we had 8 offspring and 8 offspring, the gene sees 16 offspring. If here we had 10 offspring to the defector and 1 offspring to the cooperator, the gene sees 11 offspring, regardless of where the offspring are coming from. Likewise, sees 11 offspring here. And then here, 5 and 5, the gene sees 10. So from the gene's perspective, all it sees is 16, 11, 10, 11. And so if you're the gene encoding for behavior, do you think a cooperative gene or a defecting gene will be selected by natural selection in this case, and why? What's going to be the dominant strategy that selection is going to pick for defection and cooperation among clones? Any thoughts? Yep. Why cooperation? Right. So it sounds like you're saying the benefit is high for cooperation here, whereas here the benefit is high for. So if you're a gene, you would really like a shot at a gene in unrelated individuals. You'd really like a shot at that temptation 10. You like those 10 offspring. But if you can't get the 10 offspring, 5 offspring are not so bad, especially given that the alternative were 1 offspring. So that's from the gene perspective here. But over here, I think it's pretty clear 16 offspring are better than all those other options. So from the gene's perspective, you get higher fitness to cooperate. So clones should cooperate if they have the option here. That's what we're getting out of this. So this is suggesting that, I've taken the extreme case, but there may be an intermediate level of relatedness that is the that is like the trigger, that is the threshold in between whether it is better to go alone or better to cooperate. And if you did a little bit of math, you could figure out based on how big these TRPS are. So basically how big it's really how big this reward is versus this punishment. Based on the reward and the benefit, there should be a critical relationship where like, if it's my sister, I'll cooperate with her, but my cousin, they're a little too far away. In that point, I'm going to go it alone. So you could imagine a kind of a gradient of relatedness where there'd be a threshold that anyone higher than that threshold you cooperate with, anyone lower than that you defect with. And that is what we refer to as inclusive fitness theory or kin selection. So if you've seen the expression RB greater than C, which probably could have written up here, but I'll have a kind of a more numerical example from the parent-offspring conflict here in a second. But that's what this is all about. Otherwise known as Hamilton's rule. So the same Bill Hamilton from Selfish Herd was the one that first kind of wrote this out. But people kind of wrote this out qualitatively before him, and he just kind of finally put numbers to it. So it's this general idea that there is a critical relatedness above which we would expect apparent prisoner's dilemmas to be resolved with cooperation, and below which we'd expect prisoner's dilemmas to be resolved with defection. Questions about that? What I mean by kin selection? So it is a selection for cooperating with your kin, with those that are sufficiently related to you. Yeah. 100%. The question was, does this vary based on the behavior? It varies based on the rewards. And so if there is an extremely high cost for, and again, maybe I should have written this out, but if, let's see if I can sketch this here. So this is R, which is relatedness. This is benefit to the recipient, and this is cost to the actor. So if the benefit to the recipient is really high, and they are at least slightly related to me, then if I pay a moderate cost, I'll be willing to do it. But at the point where I have to pay a huge cost, then I'm not willing to do it. So this absolutely different helping behaviors, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal for me to drive your kid to school. It's on my way to work. So in that case, I'll drive my sister's kid to school. It's on my way to work. I'm related to the kid. I'm related to the sister. It all works out. But then if it's like, will you pay for my kid to fly to Disney World? Like, well, that's a large cost to me. I know you're my sister, but the benefit to the kid doesn't really match the cost to me. Maybe you do that on your own. Yeah. So questions about that? Hamilton's rule, inclusive fitness. All right, so this then relates to in our parent-offspring conflict here. This was at the end of lecture I2, where this is actually from another evolutionary biologist who was kicking around the same time as Hamilton, Robert Trivers, and one of his big contributions was modeling parent-offspring conflict, which we talked about briefly. And if we look at this graph that I just flashed up at the end of I2, then there is this, and we'll explain every part of this graph here, but there's this benefit or cost to parent in fitness. So Trivers meant this in terms of inclusive fitness. So basically what Trivers was saying is that there are two perspectives on helping behavior. So there's parental investment. So this is, for example, milk provided by parent to offspring. The more milk you provide one offspring, the less milk you can provide to other offspring currently and potentially other offspring in the future. So that's what we mean by parental investment, is it's not just helping behavior, it's helping behavior at a cost to future offspring or other offspring. And so we can then model then the benefits and costs of that helping behavior. So this is one milk level, and this is another milk level. And there's a benefit that is being provided to the one that is receiving the milk. And so one of those, if the animal is starving, if the offspring is starving, a little bit of milk goes a long way, but eventually there's diminishing marginal returns. That's the reason why this benefit curve goes off this way. There is a cost in terms of fitness lost. So the amount that of fitness I lose by providing this milk. There's an energetic cost to me to provide this milk, plus I lose out on the milk. So there is a cost to the parent genes for investing in that one offspring. Now, interestingly enough, the cost to that offspring is half of the cost to the parent, because the cost is in terms of the other offspring. And the parent has half her genes related to both offspring, which means the offspring are a quarter related to each other, not half related to each other. So the offspring are not clones. And so because of that, then the parent sees twice the cost that the offspring does. Or if I were to write that out, I could say that the benefit to the parent, if I say, well, I'm half related to the offspring. And so I'm going to do the slightly different version of Hamilton's rule here. So I've got 0.5 relatedness to the offspring compared to the 0.5 related. So this is the parent's math. This is what acts on the genes of the parent. And so the idea here is this is the benefit to the offspring I'm feeding. This is the cost in terms of the offspring that I'm not feeding. And so I'm half related to both. So basically, I'm just seeing, is the benefit of this investment level greater than the cost? And if it is, then I go ahead and do it. But from the perspective of the offspring, then the offspring has a benefit of B, which is how much I'm getting. But the offspring has got, the offspring is going to be effectively the net relate. And it'd be better if I actually had the full math here to explain why I'm going to do a 0.5 here. But effectively, because the offspring shares half the genes with its sister or brother compared to the parent, then whereas for the parent's math you get B greater than C, for the offspring's math you get B greater than 0.5 C. So for the offspring, it prefers an investment. Its genes will behave. It will have behaviors selected for a higher investment rate than the behaviors selected by the parent. So this was the kind of interesting thing that Trivers became very interested in, is that you can, even though it's all a family, within the family, because you have to spread the investment out over multiple offspring, the parent may have a fitness maximizing investment of P, whereas the offspring will prefer an investment of O, which is greater than P. And this suggests that there might be dishonest overbegging, where you'll have an offspring that will claim to be hungry when it actually is just trying to get the parent to lift herself off this parental optimum toward the optimum that favors that particular offspring. And that's what Trivers introduced parent-offspring conflict. And if you read Trivers' paper, he just uses basic inclusive fitness math that came from Hamilton 3 years earlier. So that's what's going on there. So this is an example where without knowing the relatedness, then we have all these questions about why is the parent feeding the offspring? Well, that seems a little dumb. I mean, of course the offspring is related to the parent, but then the more complicated question is, why is she feeding the offspring exactly what she's feeding? Why is the offspring apparently needing more relative to what the offspring is being fed? So we can use inclusive fitness theory to explain both the behavior of the parent as well as the begging behavior of the offspring. And we, using the same theory, will predict a different level investment from the parent as we do from the offspring. And that conflict will lead to interesting behavioral dynamics that we do see in when we observe, these parental care in nature. So questions about that example. I know this is maybe not the clearest, and maybe I can expand that in a revised version of this if that'll help. But it's basically the idea here, just because the offspring is half as related to their sisters and brothers as the parent is related to their sisters and brothers. So the parent sees a higher cost of investing in one sibling over another relative to the sibling. The sibling says, hey, it's actually not that costly because I don't care as much about this other person that's my sibling. Questions about that? So application of inclusive fitness theory to understand family behavior. All right, so there's a lot more that could be said. This is just meant to be kind of the tip of the iceberg. There are lots of other ways that we can explain cooperative behavior in a parent-prisoner's dilemmas. I talked about kin selection. There's a bunch of other mechanisms, from direct reciprocity, indirect reciprocity, and so-called group selection. These are all things that I would love to talk about, but they're kind of outside of the scope of this class. If they're things that interest you, fortunately, we have a whole class, a semester-long class focused on social behavior that uses the methods from this course focused entirely on social behavior, and that's offered in the spring from Jennifer Fuel. I always forget if it's 435 or 436. I think it's 436. So if you're interested in social behavior, definitely encourage you to take her course. So again, there's our reminders, same from the beginning there. Let's give you your iClickers so that you can get out of here and plan for a good Thanksgiving. If I can find my mouse. There it is. All right, so the question here is, what is the area around an animal avoiding a predator called? So what is the Voronoi cell, like what is the more common name of the area around a prey and an aggregation of prey, which represents all of the places in which if a predator were to pop up, they would probably go to that prey and not the other prey. So in selfish herd theory, what do we call that bubble around every prey, where that prey kind of owns that bubble, which gives it a disadvantage when the predator comes searching? And that's all I've got. So if you have any questions, feel free to come up. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, and have a happy Thanksgiving.